Welcome to Factory Forward, the podcast dedicated to advancing manufacturing and propelling factories into the future. Today, we are thrilled to have Michel Baudin with us. In this episode, Michel Baudin discusses the importance of distinguishing between work standards and standard work and emphasizes the need for a balanced approach to maintaining consistency and allowing for local improvements. He also highlights the evolution of quality improvement, from process capability to flow and error proofing, and the crucial role of leadership in driving lean initiatives. Now, meet your host, Zishan Zia.
Welcome to the Factory Forward podcast. Today, we are joined by Michel Baudin, a distinguished lean manufacturing consultant and founder of the Takt Times Group. Trained in engineering, applied math, and data science, Michel has revolutionized manufacturing processes through his deep expertise in statistics and technology integration. With decades of experience across industries like automotive and aerospace, he has authored numerous technical books and papers. Michel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for the flattering introduction. It's a thing that I don't claim to have revolutionized industry.
I've been following a lot of your content. I think you're seen with incredible respect amongst the industrial engineering community in general, but yeah.
Okay, so shoot.
Yeah, so Michel, absolutely. I'm going to jump straight into the questions, and looking forward to hearing what you say. Could you explain the role of standard work in sustaining improvements in a lean manufacturing setting? You've talked a lot about it, and
Yeah, I like to highlight, make sure there is no confusion between work standards and standard work. Because work standards, the purpose of work standards is to ensure that the same work is done the same way every time, wherever it's done, whoever it's done by, whatever shift, whatever location in the world, particular operation is supposed to be done exactly the same way. And that's what work standards are supposed to ensure. Standard work is about combinations of tasks into an operator job. So that's a different kind of things. But the and do you find this distinction in the Toyota literature, even in the Lean lexicon from the Lean Enterprise Institute? That distinction is made, but in the on LinkedIn, in all the discussion, in all the forums, the word standard work has replaced work standards, and that distinction is no longer being made, which I find unfortunate because in that process, the standard work part is forgotten. And I think it's unfortunate because if you don't do this standard work analysis on how do you combine tasks into operator jobs so as to avoid having machines waiting for operators and operators waiting for machines during the takt time, you leave on the table something like half the productivity improvement potential, and I think it's highly unfortunate. Yeah. So now, I assume your question is really about work standards, because that in terms of sustaining improvements, that's what you're talking about, and I think it certainly plays a role, but that role should not be overemphasized. And really, the challenge, and we can get into some more details on that, but the challenge, particularly if you're operating multinationally and you have several plants around the world that are doing the same process, you have to allow people in each local plants to make their own improvements. But if they do, then the work methods that are being followed throughout the world start to diverge, and so you have a problem of inconsistencies creeping in how the work is being done, which creates some quality problem. So you always have to keep a balance between allowing local people to make improvements and maintaining consistency between the way the work is being done everywhere. So that means that whenever an improvement is made in site A, it has to be shared with everyone and propagated to the other sites, and that requires a lot of effort and a lot of organization.
Makes sense. So do I get it? So are you saying that generally standard work is more important than work standards?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
They really address different issues. if you only you can't have standard work without having work standards. Okay? And uh, a lot of people say that unless you have work standards, you can't improve operations. Well, that's nonsense because in a lot of cases, the problem with an operation that it doesn't have any work standards, nobody has bothered writing them, or somebody wrote them 10 years ago and they've been sitting in binders that nobody's reading because the information in these binders is obsolete. So it's actually not a foregone conclusion that you have good work standards for an operation, and you may have to generate them, and that's a very significant improvement that you're making right there. Uh, and then you have to think about, how do I do this in such a way that it's actually useful? Okay. And putting lengthy documents, Victorian novels in binders is not the way to do it, even though that's the way it's mostly done uh, in plants, and those are not effective work standards. What tends to work is you use something like an A3 sheet of paper or 11 by 17 if you're in the US, and for one operation, you try to put the most essential information on how to do this information in that one sheet of paper, and you post it right above the workstation of the operators, so that any supervisor or line leader who's walking by can see how the operation is supposed to be done, can see how it is really done. And if it's not done the way it's specified on the sheet, it may mean that the operator has found a better way or that the operator is doing it the wrong way. Either case, this discrepancy needs to be resolved. So that's a kind of dynamic that works. And those have to be dynamic documents, because if you're going to even a plant that tried to generate this kind of work standard, and you see the sheets and it hadn't been updated in 5 years, it's a dead letter. It's nothing anybody pays attention to. If you pay attention to it, it's not going to last more than 6 months before it's updated. And then you have other issues. It's like, should it be a sheet of paper or should it be a screen? Okay. And when should it be a screen and when should it be a sheet of paper? And I think the key thing about this is how often you need to update it.
Right.
If you have if you have to update this frequently, like every week or every month, the paper becomes a very awkward medium to do that, because you have to print a lot of these updated work standards, and you have to distribute them to every location where that work is being done. It's very easy to forget one. It depends on people going there and actually posting them. Whereas if you have screens, you just download it to the right location. It automatically appears everywhere. And so whether it's more effective or even more economic to use the screens or the paper depends on this frequency of change. It depends also on the variety of products that you're making. And so for example, if you're in a really low volume, high mix environment, you would have to flip through a lot of sheets of paper all the time. And if you go to the extreme case where you're making one of a kind systems, the problem that occurs then is that operators actually have to read the instructions in order to do the work. Now, if it's repetitive, after a little bit of time, it goes on automatic. They have muscle memory of what needs to be done. They don't need to look at the instructions all the time. But if you're doing something you haven't done in 6 months, or you haven't done in 2 years, or if you've never done before, you have to read the instructions. It's like cooking a recipe you've never done before. You can't do it unless you read the instructions, and you have a lot of hesitation. And so to remove the hesitation time, and then one solution to do that is to actually not only have screens, but have a prompting system on screen. So depending on where you are, there are triggers that call the proper instructions to appear to you. So again, the more you're in this kind of situation, the more sense it makes to use technology to provide the instructions. The more stable it is. You say you're making electricity meters, you're making the same model of electricity meter for 10 years, and you're making them at the rate of 1 million a month.
It's relevant, yeah.
1 million a year. you don't need to update that very often. In this case, when it's high volume, low mix, stable for a long period of time, paper is cheaper than screens. And then you were asking about how Toyota does this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've never worked for Toyota, so I only know about what Toyota does from people who work there and what Toyota publishes. And they had a problem when they expanded. They had 34 assembly plants overseas with workforces speaking different languages. They had a problem getting the work done consistently.
Yeah.
And so most car companies still use paper for instructions, right? But that was in the early 2000s. Toyota set up a global production center in the Nagoya area, which centralized the production of work instructions for all their assembly plants. And whenever there are updates, these updates are generated in one location, in all the languages used in all the different plants, and distributed electronically to these plants. So they were actually ahead of the pack in terms of using electronic means of communication for this.
Oh, I didn't realize. I never heard about that before. That's really
It's called the Global Production Center, and I think it started in 2006.
right.
I haven't followed up on it since. I don't know what it's become, but it was a response to a problem they had of divergence between their plants in different countries.
Got it. I see. So, Michel, based on your observations, what other unique quality practices and do you see that are at Toyota? Do you think more manufacturers should be adopting?
Um, well, again, I only know I'm an outsider to Toyota. So one key practice in that I think is very important is the practice of stopping production when you start making defectives. And it sounds like an obvious right thing to do. In practice, it's very difficult to implement. And I remember one plant where I worked as a consultant of that plant for several years. It was making agricultural machinery, and they were receiving a high volume of defectives from a supplier. But instead of stopping production until they had the right one, they assembled the defective part and then they fixed it at the end. And I couldn't, as a consultant, I failed to convince the management that this should be stopped. And then they did something extraordinary. They hired a new plant manager from Toyota, and immediately he put a stop to that. And that scared a lot of the managers. And his response to that was, "I don't know any other way to work." So they stopped accepting these defective parts, and that problem was solved. Now, can you always do that technically? You can do that. You can put these practices into place as long as you have capable processes.
Hmm.
But and automotive, people have been making cars for 150 years, so it's a mature product if there is any. Right. But if you're there are plenty of businesses where you have to produce in high volume with processes that are not capable.
Yeah.
And the most important example of that is semiconductors.
Yeah.
When you design a chip, you develop the process for it. When you get a yield of 10%, you switch to high volume production, which means that you start high volume production where 90% of the stuff you make is going to be thrown away.
Yeah.
If you have a policy of stopping as soon as you make a defective in that, you're never going to start.
Right.
And meanwhile, your competitors are going to produce and flood the market with their goods, and you're going to be you're going to be eliminated. So you have no choice. You have to produce in high volume without having a capable process. What in other industries was rated as a capable process. And in this kind of situation, you just cannot adopt this kind of policy. Okay? But say once you in reasonably mature industries, you work on improving your process capability, you get to have a capable process, and that you get to have a low single-digit percentage rate of defectives. And at that point, the methods that you use in order to get to this point, which are experimenting with the process based on knowledge of the process physics and chemistry and statistical design of experiments, if you have this capability in-house, these methods lose their effectiveness at that point. Okay. And at that point, what happens is that what rises to the as a concern for quality is rapid detection of problems. So it's not so much the ability to analyze the data, it's being able to detect problems quickly. Like when you don't have a capable process, you end up having to overbuild to compensate for the fact that you have yield losses. So if you do that, you end up having buffers everywhere, and you end up having large volumes of WIP that's inescapable until you have a capable process. Okay. But what happens when you have a capable process is that these big buffers of WIP that you have everywhere hide the defects. Yeah.
Wow.
So let's say you have a wire basket that contains 500 units, and every unit drops into the basket, and so you get a heap of parts in the middle of this basket. You lose the process sequence by doing that because the process gets scrambled, and you have defectives and good parts mixed in together. Okay. And that makes it very difficult. That delays the detection of problems and increases the amount of defectives you produce because you don't detect them in time. Okay. So when you're in this kind of situation, capable processes, but you still have these kind of batch processes with large amounts of WIP that you couldn't escape before you had a capable process. The next step of improvement in quality is going to be achieved by turning to flow. And if you implement one-piece flow in this kind of case, you will speed up the detection of defects and address these defects a lot faster. And when you look at, for example, there's this Sadao Nomura's book about the Dantotsu quality. That's means the word he uses in the title. Or you read about QRQC, which is an approach from Nissan. It's all about reactivity, about being able to respond to quality problems rapidly when they occur. Okay, so when you do that, it gets you another order of magnitude better. So you go from 3% to 0.3% in terms of defectives. So you get a big jump out of that, big quality improvement. When you get to that point, something else rises to the top in terms of concerns. It's human error. Until that point, human error is not the main cause of problems. Okay? At that point, it percolates to the top of the concern. That's when you start implementing error proofing in your process. Okay? And with error proofing, you can get down to 1 ppm. Okay? But the key point is that you have these three different levels of concerns, and if you don't have a capable process and you implement error proofing, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
You're addressing issues that are not the issues of the day. Okay? And if you're focusing on improving process capability when you're down to 100 ppm defectives, you're wasting your time too, because it's going to generate a lot of false alarms, and you're not going to be able to. It's not going to help you. So you have to have the right approach depending on the condition of your process. Which is one of the I think I don't know if you've read my recent post, but I've been making that point a number of times. Nobody in the quality literature says that I found. Everybody describes one particular approach, but never imagine that the entire world isn't like that. That there are different conditions with different approaches, and that there is a progression from one to the next. And now once you implemented mistake proofing and achieve these very high levels of quality, the next challenge after that is keeping it.
Yeah.
And that's there are a couple of new abbreviations that have come out of Toyota. One is JKK, It's difficult to translate what it says. It really means something like autonomous process completion. Yeah. It's I, I don't understand JKK completely, but it's about making sure that the problems stay solved.
Right.
And the other one is change point management. Somewhat easier to understand. It's having pre-planned responses to a number of events that are actually predictable, like a new operator coming in.
Mm.
So you have an operator who's been doing a very good job at this particular workstation, very qualified. That person leaves for whatever reason, somebody else comes in. How do you handle that transition to make sure that doesn't cause the system to break? Okay. So there are a number of things that you need to do after that to sustain this kind of achievement.
Michelle, so sounds like is Toyota still basically leading the pack when it comes to quality and lean, whatever branding it's put under, but do you generally think that they're still leading in terms of
Well, I,
innovation?
I don't have a personal opinion about it, but a company like JD Power and Associates does, right? Are
Right.
you familiar with them?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about ranking, JD Power's ranking, and and
Yes, and Toyota used Toyota, Lexus, and other Japanese brands, Honda, Nissan. They all used to be in the top. Now they're not even in the top 10.
right,
And the people you see in the top 10 are really surprising, like Dodge
right,
or Genesis, like the luxury brand from Hyundai. So you have according to JD Power and Associates, you have these companies that are completely unexpected to be at the top, that are actually outperforming Toyota, Nissan, Honda in quality. Yeah. So
why do you think that is? Yeah.
it's I don't know why that is, but I'm just looking at the stats, and so it's probably a good idea to take a look at what these companies are doing in terms of quality that Toyota isn't doing, and there may be some strategic commercial issues behind this. Uh, Toyota
They're
used
going after different markets and so on, economically challenged markets, perhaps, and uh,
well,
uh,
Toyota penetrated the U.S. market based on quality.
yeah,
Right? The reason people bought Toyotas was they were not very expensive, and the quality was much better than the quality of American cars. That was the story of the late 1970s, early 1980s. So at that point, to Toyota, the quality reputation were the crown jewels. Okay? And it was managed like the crown jewels. Right? This reputation was absolutely essential. But you find cars that are rated badly in the quality ranking that sell very well
right,
from a lot of different countries, because they're prestige items and people want to have their neighbors see that they have a car of this brand. I'm not going to name any brands, but in terms of keeping up with the Joneses, you have to have a car of that brand in your driveway, and it's a prestige thing. It doesn't matter if it's a piece of junk from a point of view of quality. Yeah, you still want to have it, and so it seems like the importance of quality to the business is shifting.
right,
There are also a number of circumstances. You always, from the quality literature, you always get the impression that quality is so essential to the business. It is not always the case.
yeah,
Uh, it's not for example, if you're in a protected market, and did some consulting in some countries in the world where the market was protected,
yeah,
and the buying public wasn't aware of quality issues. Their expectations were very low. If you worked hard to exceed these expectations, it brought you no benefit because the public didn't realize it.
yeah,
In completely open markets, then the public did realize it.
yeah,
Another case where it's not manufacturing, it's in the software business. software industry really grew in the 1980s, right? Especially with PCs.
Yeah.
And PC users had no clue about software quality.
Right.
And you have case after case where high quality products lost market share to low quality products because these low quality products were aggressively marketed.
Right.
And that's what for operating systems, word processors, spreadsheets.
No, totally get what you're talking about. You know, in India, a lot of surrounding markets as well, where there was protectionism around the automotive industry. There's a very similar story there as well, especially in the 80s and the 90s. You know, you only had local brands that were allowed, and essentially people just didn't know what quality was until the market was open. So I totally get what you're saying. And similarly with software, in fact, that's still the case. Marketing and some, it's not always the better product that wins. Absolutely.
One of the things that's really struck me, it was a long time ago. I read this book by David Hounshell, From the American System to Mass Production. It's about the history of manufacturing technology in the US from 1800 to 1932. So and there's a long chapter on the sewing machine industry.
Right.
And he follows particular three manufacturers. One was Wilcox and Gibbs, which put a lot of emphasis on the quality of their products, using the latest technology to make them, the latest quality technology. There was technology of interchangeable parts at the time. And they built about 50,000 of them. There's a Palo Alto, there's a little heritage museum in Palo Alto where you can find a Wilcox and Gibbs machine. Then you have the Wheeler and Wilson company that made another brand of sewing machines. And the Wheeler and Wilson company wasn't quite as adamant as Wilcox and Gibbs in terms of applying this technology, and they contracted out the making of fixtures to make the sewing machines to a machine tool company, and that launched the machine tool industry in the U.S. Big time. And Wheeler and Wilson made about a few 100,000 machines before they went bankrupt. Okay. Then there was a third company that said, "Screw that! What we're going to do is put demonstrations in department stores." Okay. So they had their machines demonstrated to housewives in department stores, and that company was called Singer.
Right.
And their product was quality was inferior to both the Wheeler and Wilson and the Wilcox and Gibbs machine, demonstrably inferior. They sold 60 million of their units of their product. And they eventually, 30 years on, they started adopting the same technologies that Wheeler and Wilson and Wilcox and Gibbs had used. And it's very interesting in Hounshell's book because he shows you actual pictures of the before and after of some of the Singer family sewing machines from before the 1870s had the serial number of the machine engraved on every part. Right. Because you couldn't take a part from one machine and use it on another one. And then suddenly, after a time, no more engraving of the serial number on the machine. The parts were interchangeable. So that's when they had adopted the technology. And so that was another case that I thought was absolutely fascinating, where focusing on quality was suicidal.
Right.
At the same time, for Toyota starting to market cars in the US in the 70s, it was absolutely essential. That was the by complacency, the American automakers had essentially opened this door to not just to Toyota, but to Nissan, and other Japanese automakers to find their way into this market that these big three had controlled for a long time, and they had this vulnerability, and they exploited this vulnerability. Now it's fast forward 70 years, business is different, and obviously quality doesn't play as much of a part in Toyota's strategy as it did back then. and I don't know. I mean, this is the extent of what I know about it, which is
No, absolutely. Let me see, smiley. No, absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, I've read books by people like Bob Lutz. That were from these.
Chrysler.
Yeah, from exactly right from the top three U.S. automotives, and essentially they were laying the blame more on U.S. regulation, environmental regulations, that they supported Japanese companies rather than supporting us, and that's why they came in. But essentially, if you look at independent analysts, that
Mhm.
they're exactly saying what you are saying, that indeed the Toyotas of the world were better quality cars. It's just as simple as that. But yeah, I appreciate that. Also, that Singer example, that could be a great case study in marketing or business schools.
It is a great case study, and I recommend that book if you have a chance to take a look at it. It's really the only criticism possibly of this book is that it got so many facts that it becomes a little bit tedious to read. But you know that the guy is really giving. It's not there is absolutely no bullshit in this book. It's really a factual historical account and quite interesting from a point of view about the strategy of development for manufacturing and how it happened in the U.S. It ends with how GM took over from Ford in the 1920s, and that's another story. But
Michelle, can you? I know it's earlier in the recording, but can you repeat the name of that book, please?
it's from the American System to Mass Production,
American.
1800 to 1932, by David Hounshell.
Perfect, fantastic. Michelle, switching gears a little bit, what traits do you believe are essential for a leader in a lean-focused organization?
What qualities?
Yeah, are essential for a leader i-
Yes,
in this, let's say, a quality-focused organization. How does that leader look like?
in a quality-focused organization.
Yeah, and lean-focused organization, if you will.
It's a very broad question because different people. I mean, there are different styles of leadership that work, uh, one thing, for example, that should never have worked in principle was the way a major auto parts company in France did it. Uh, they essentially said this is those sent instructions to the plant managers from the top of the corporation saying this is how you're going to be doing the work.
Right.
And many years later, I met I had a colleague, a consultant, who was a former plant manager from that company. And we were discussing my books, Lean Logistics. He actually attended a class when I was going through this book. And at the end of the class, he came to me. He said, "I have used every tool you described in this course uh, as a plant manager for that company, but nobody ever bothered telling me why we should be doing that or how they fit together. Why does it make sense to use Kanbans with this in this particular circumstance? To use milk runs all of the he knew all of it because he had practiced it, but nobody had ever bothered explaining to him why, right? And so in principle, this shouldn't have worked,
Right.
right? It's exactly the sort of thing you're told not to do. Don't do it by road,
Yeah.
right? But that company did extremely well with this. And so why did it work for them? I think I think key reason why the business they were in, they were making auto parts, right? So to take verbatim a system that works in making cars and applying it to auto parts, it's got a pretty damn good chance of working, even if the people to whom you have implemented by rote, even if they don't understand what they're doing, it has a good chance of working. Okay? So that is one case. Polar opposite of this was this guy. was an engineer in a company that made there was a supplier to Boeing in the Seattle area, and I met him because he attended a public class I was giving, and we became friends, and we're still friends many decades later. And he has since become an executive in another company, and then he became a consultant, and he's doing great work. Um, he he wasn't in the leadership position in that company, but no, he was a very creative guy, and he started doing things within the area that he was responsible for. Some of these things were actually somewhat surprising, like using the parts he was making were small enough that you could use toy trains to move them.
Right.
So we spent a few $100s in train tracks and model rail cars, put conductive film at the bottom of the car and to hold the parts, and then use this to transfer for the parts.
Innovative. Wow.
Pardon me?
Yeah, talk about being innovative. Wow.
And that was a big hit with the management because they kept coming to show the choo-choo train to visitors and there was a process where all you could buy in the market was a machine that made 50 units at a time, and he needed to make 1 unit at a time. So he built one. So he built a machine for that. And he wanted to have some production monitors above the line, where you have how many parts you should have made by now. This is 1030. We should have made 300, and you've made 295. So you show these two numbers. And he saw the cost of these monitors if you bought them, and he thought this was too expensive. And at that time, he saw carts coming by in the hallway. They were getting rid of obsolete computers from the offices. So he grabbed a few of those, and had a friend of his code. It was a pretty simple thing to code the display of these production counts on one of these surplus monitors with this surplus computer, obsolete computer from the company. So he was a guy who did that sort of thing. And normally, if you're in this kind of situation, there are really limits to what you can do. But he was able to influence the management of that company quite substantially. Even though from this lower middle management position, he was able to get a lot done, and from that went on to do it at other companies. So there is not a universal pattern of leadership that works. There's what works and what doesn't work, but we can talk for a long time about what doesn't work.
No, I love these stories. I appreciate it.
So, but the sort of thing. The one thing
doesn't work? Could you give me a 1 minute summary of what doesn't work?
Well, one thing that you find all over the literature on lean is you got to start with 5S.
Mhm.
And if that doesn't work.
Right.
And when you think, why doesn't it work? Because it sounds very simple, right? It doesn't work because the fact that it has no technical component doesn't make it easier. It makes it harder. It's all management, and that's very hard. It also has to involve everybody. You don't have 10% of the people doing 5S. You have to have everybody doing 5S. And you don't go from involving nobody to involving everybody as the first thing you do. That's stacking the odds against you. Right. And so you see plant after plant where you see these sad 3-year-old banners sagging with 5S.
What you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, you've seen that, yes. And so it's just a bad idea, and it's an idea to me that I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but what I suspect that it comes from supplier support groups of companies. So you say you're a large company and you want to help your suppliers improve, but you have 200 suppliers who are all in 200 different businesses. I mean, I'm talking about tier 1 supplier, right? 200 tier one suppliers, that's about right. So there's no way, as a member of this supplier support group, that you can understand the business issues of all these 200 suppliers. So you go there and you see the plant is a mess. You say you got to do 5S. So it's like you have a kid in school who has problems, and you look at his bedroom and it's a mess. And say you've got to tidy up your room. The room probably needs tidying up, but that's not going to solve the problems at school. Okay, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're telling these suppliers to start with 5S because they can see they can understand 5S. I mean, the supplier support people understand 5S. They don't understand the business of the suppliers. Okay. So I think that's partly where that comes from. Yeah.
Right. I love that, Michel. Again, I love all of these stories, and I'll wrap up with one final question that I ask all of my guests. It's a little bit cheesy, but so what is the one thing that manufacturers don't do enough of to be factory forward in 2024? You know,
You what?
to
To
be
be what?
factory forward. Our podcast is called Factory Forward Podcast. So,
Oh, yes.
what is something that manufacturers just aren't doing enough in 2024 that should be common knowledge that everybody should already be doing?
That's a broad question.
I love your stories in response to those questions. So it's okay.
It, I don't think there's one answer to that. No, what's the right thing to do in one company may be completely wrong in another. So I've been talking about SPC with on my blog quite a bit.
Yeah.
I describe it as obsolete, and then I had this discussion with another consultant on LinkedIn named Lonnie Wilson. I don't know if you know him. And he tells me that he had a client in Mexico where it actually did work quite well, and it was something like 10 or 15 years ago, uh, and no, he actually documented that story in one of his books, and I have this book, and he directed me to that story, and I read it and say, yeah, well, in this kind of in the circumstances of that plant, that was the right thing to do based on the level of the level of education of the people in the workforce, the technology available, etc. That was actually the right thing to do, and so it's very. The way forward depends on many things. It depends on what you're making. It depends on where you are. It depends on what kind of people you have working in the plant. It depends on too many things to give one answer to that.
Makes sense. No, I appreciate that as well.
Digitizing everything may be the right thing to do in some places and completely irrelevant in others.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That's
No.
why it's a non-answer. I understand, but
No, yeah.
that's the best I can give you.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Michel. This is amazing. I really, again, to repeat myself, I love the stories, and I'm sure that our audience is going to love those as well. You gave a bunch of references in there as well of books, and I think that's going to be very relevant also. Several of the things that you talked about, I'd never heard of them before. And in fact, in general, I don't see enough people talking about quality in that lean manufacturing context. Lean, as far as I see, is more talked about in the context of productivity improvements, not so relatively less frequently in the quality realm. And I appreciated a lot of the points that you made.
So I think quality is going to be the subject of my next book. So
when does it come out?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm still researching it and coming up with material. So then I have to organize the material into a book. But
yeah, no,
that's what I'm working
I'll
on.
be looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
The last book, The Introduction to Manufacturing with Torbjörn Netland, took 5 years to write.
Right. Okay. So it might be a long time. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Michel. Again, great to have you, and really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and nice meeting you.
And that's a wrap on this powerhouse episode of Factory Forward. If you loved this episode, share it with your network and keep the conversation going on social media using #FactoryForward. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo and striving for excellence. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Factory Forward.